Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another week of Loki. We got a new episode this week. It is the fifth one, I believe, out of the sixth run of Loki.
It's the penultimate episode.
The penultimate episode. So that means we're coming at you with another episode of You, Me, and Loki, the second to last. And as always, I'm Alex.
And I'm Nick, and we are really at the end here. It's crazy how quickly this came and went. It's hard to believe that we are 1 week as of recording away from wrapping up this story. Alex, do you want to go ahead and let the listeners and the viewers know what your immediate initial feelings were of episode 5, which, if we're paying attention at home, is called Journey into Mystery.
Yeah.
So what did you think?
So I think that we have talked a lot about tone these last two episodes.
Sure.
The episode 2 back, its tone was more of a character development, kind of slower paced. The one previous to this one was more action and everything seemed to be very high consequence. I feel like this is the perfect balance between the two of them. I think in this episode we see both a lot of character development and a lot of action take place. A lot of things that can't be taken back, a lot of things that are going to start the domino effect that is going to lead us into what is looking to be a very exciting finale that is sure to change the MCU as we know it.
Absolutely. I think we're all kind of ruminating on the repercussions of everything that's going on as it pertains to this series and what it's going to do for the MCU going forward. And I think we've kind of doubled back. The show doubled us back after like the first episode or two, as far as like, well, you know, all these branching like Nexus events, like the thing that Sylvie did in episode 2. It's not quite what's birthing the multiverse as we kind of thought it might, leading into like the new Doctor Strange and Spider-Man. But it definitely still is, again, planting the seeds. Marvel plays the long game. They know what they're doing, and this will ultimately all lead somewhere. What show and what movie, we don't know yet. But this episode, to me, for a penultimate episode leading into the finale, I wasn't as like jaw-dropped, like ready to go like I was for something, like Breaking Bad or even previous seasons of Game of Thrones, where like that final episode before the finale is usually like a holy shit, like I don't know what's going to happen. I'm like so nervous, like I'm excited and stuff. And it just felt very like rudimentary. It felt a lot more slow paced as far as like the plotting of like the story is concerned. But I think as far as like a character thing, again, I think Sylvie and Loki's relationship is really the star in this episode, and Loki again coming into his own. He's such a different character from where we found him at the beginning of this season. And I think that that's brilliant. I think the characterization of all the characters, quite frankly, is the biggest strength of this show. So overall, I very much enjoyed it. I liked Richard E. Grant as classic Loki. And I like a lot of the things that this episode questions and brings up. And we're going to talk about a number of them on this episode. Alex, Do you want to talk about the first point, which is...
So as we open up, of course, we see our classic Marvel logo taken over by the Loki colors, and we are brought into exactly where that post-credit scene left us off. It's Loki standing up from the ground. He is accompanied by his new traveling companions, boastful Loki, Kid Loki, who I like to call classic Loki, but they refer to as old Loki a couple of times, and Crocodile Loki. So we're introduced to this world, and this world is the culmination of all of the universes that have been reset, quote unquote, by the TVA. And because of that, it has pieces from a bunch of different multiverses in it. One kind of interesting example that tells you just how off the beaten path we are in this episode, we see a Thanos copter in the background, which is a reference to the classic comics where Thanos rides around in a giant yellow helicopter that says Thanos on the side. It's a nice little
As
nod.
one does.
It's a nice little nod to the comics. And even more so, we meet our main antagonist for this episode, who is a character known as Eliath. He I say he, but I should, I guess, say them. They are a giant smoke cloud that is all consuming in this universe and seems to be that delete trash button on your computer that deletes things out of the trash can. Um, and we're warned by the other variant Lokis that it's that thing's domain, and all they are to that thing are its next meal. And that tells us the current danger that Loki is in.
Yeah, they describe it as they're basically like, we are in a shark tank and that's the shark and it's basically going to eat us.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a dragon figure in a way, like it resembles some sort of like almost like a Toho monster, like a Godzilla type thing. Just this all-encompassing smoke thing, like you said. So that's where we are. The place that they commonly dub it is the Void. And in later portions of the episode, Ravonna is talking to Sylvie and describes that there's like basically nothing post the Void. Like it just is, right? And it's an amalgamation of a lot of things that have been pruned over the course of the TVA's existence across multiple timelines. Initially, I think a lot of people were also wondering, like, is this only populated with Lokis? We see a bevy of Lokis, which we'll get to later on. But that's not the case because there's that scene where, like, a big ship appears and there are, like, captains and sea sailors on the ship, and they're trying to like shoot Alioth as well. So this is clearly not just a pocket reality for Lokis exclusively. The fact that there's more Lokis is because, as one of the running themes of the character of Loki, is that they are survivors. They are mischievous and they never really die because they always find a way to save their own skin and persevere. The Alioth entity, the character, when I just did an immediate cursory Google search, that character has been mixed in with Kang before. So those two characters, Kang and Alioth, are kind of cut from the same cloth in the sense that they have, played around with each other in the comics. So this is, again, another Kang watch. This is another seed being planted that, again, is stacking up to say, hey, man, are we actually going to see Kang? We'll talk more about speculation on if we're going to see him as we get into the other points.
I believe that it was stated that the only creature to have a larger kingdom than Kang was Alioth. But Kang in the comics was actually able to section Alioth off to a certain point of the timeline, quote unquote, so that Alioth could not take what was Kang's. So we've seen Kang use this ability in the comics, at least, to section off Alioth from certain parts. That, at least in my opinion, gives reason to believe he could trap Alioth within a certain universe as well.
The next, I guess, big moment that happens in this episode is we're back at the TVA. Sylvie and Ravonna are kind of teamed up, but they're also not. It feels kind of weird. They're kind of like, I'll work for you, but I'll kill you if you do anything weird and stuff. It's kind of all at the behest of, Ravonna. And basically, she's still trying to find out who created the TVA. What are these things? Like, what were those robot timekeepers? Who are the real timekeepers? Are the real timekeepers? And there seemed to be a level of, shock and, like, not knowing what's really going on from Ravonna. She seemed to be fairly surprised by a lot of these new revelations, and I didn't know if it was intentional or not. And then, she quickly betrays Sylvie, and Sylvie does what only a Loki would do, is basically prunes herself, So she takes herself to the Void, not necessarily knowing where she's going to end up. But what did you think about all this? What did you think about that kind of back and forth that Sylvie and Ravonna had?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing initially is that you really can't trust Ravonna at this point. Everybody knows that. Anything Ravonna does from the minute that she stepped on that elevator and lied about not knowing why Sylvie was there, I can't trust her. So in that moment where she is kind of feeding information to Sylvie, you can tell that there's something strange going on. We also see a reintroduction of Miss Minutes, of course, played by Tara Strong, who is capable of lying. We learn she's capable of deception, because she lies to Sylvie about how long it's taking to dig through the files, the fact that the spacecraft that can travel through the void exists, all of these lies that are accumulating. It makes you wonder, why did Ravonna tell the truth to Sylvie sometimes? Why did she tell Sylvie that Loki was still alive? I guess she had to in that moment, or else she was going to face death. But a point that I really want to drive home is that I feel in this episode, and when I say I've been on the Sylvie's not a Loki train since day one, I've basically been the conductor. But Sylvie is, at least in this episode, the most Loki that we've ever seen her, in the sense that some of the choices that she makes is so outside of the box. You could only see it, in my opinion, and from my experience, from a well-seasoned D&D player who's just looking to throw the DM off. She makes some choices that are so crazy and so like high risk, high reward, that I think that she made some really crazy decisions this episode. And we'll go through that because there are a couple that happened throughout it. But yeah, pruning herself, especially after immediately finding out that Ravonna was lying to you about most of the stuff she was talking about, was a big move that Sylvie made. Of course, leaving Ravonna with no source of information other than to return to B-15 and ask B-15 why she had freed the Lokis. But we are brought back to, in last episode, where Sylvie says, clearly there's something else you want from us, or you would have just erased us. I feel the same way about B-15, because why didn't Ravonna just wipe her, you know? Why did she keep her? What information doesn't Ravonna have? And I think we're going to see a lot of that play out, kind of like you had said, in the next episode.
Yeah, well, there was a quote that Ravonna says. There's a line. She's basically asking what Sylvie showed her when they escaped for that moment, and she saw her past memories. So there's some fascination from that, from Ravonna. To what extent and for what reasons, we don't necessarily know. I do think that Ravonna is, much like everyone else at the TVA, a variant. I don't think that she was born from the Timekeepers, because again, the Timekeepers are in the very essence a sham. Whether there's real Timekeepers and those were just decoys, or if it's Kang pulling the string, whatever. These people, Ravonna included, were not created by the Timekeepers.
Right.
And this all sacred timeline is not real, at least in the way that the TVA presents it. I think there's some alternative ulterior motives happening that could lead to the Kang thing. So I think that Ravonna was taken from her life and brainwashed, much like everyone else was. And a lot of this, seeing that the Timekeepers weren't real and trying to discover what was at the beginning of time and all this stuff, I think all of this is genuine curiosity and wanting to learn on her part. And I actually don't think that there is any, as of yet, connection between her and Kang. I actually don't think if Kang is in the show, they know each other at all. We could see that, but I think that she is in the dark, and she's trying to find answers as well.
I agree with you. I think that in most storytelling, you find characters in their most truthful state when they're completely alone. And we have that scene of her and Miss Minutes hurriedly walking down a hallway where she's like, give me everything on the beginning of time. Because whoever made this, she doesn't like give it by name, which Miss Minutes would obviously know. So if they both knew, they would share that in that moment. She's like, whoever made this, I think they're in danger. And Miss Minutes starts like filing through and trying to find it.
Yeah, she's like having a crisis of faith in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. I had posed an interesting question to you after viewing the episode via private conversation, where I said, I wonder what it is that the Timekeepers had said to Ravonna that would not only ensure trust in the Timekeepers from Ravonna's perspective, but so much so that after finding out the Timekeepers weren't real, Ravonna still feels a need to protect whoever created them. So obviously there was something that happened that we don't know about. I think that might be the opening scene in the next episode, if I may be so bold to say. is maybe a flashback to a conversation between Ravonna and the Timekeepers. Let's talk about what comes next. We are back in the void. It's kind of an A plot, B plot at this point between Sylvie and Loki as we await their reconnection, which is, of course, inevitable. But we find the Loki now kind of hanging out and getting to know himself as he sits with boastful Loki, classic Loki, Kid Loki, and Croc Loki. They're having this conversation in what looks to be an underground bunker. We, of course, see a reference to Throg, a frog version of Thor akin to Spider-Ham. They're from the same universe, which is, you know, a little interesting backdoor into canonizing that. But we see a lot of weird stuff in this void place. But along with that, we see they're kind of hanging out and discussing what to do next. And Loki, in this very excited moment of self-realization after a couple of them share what their Nexus events were, Kid Loki's being that he killed Thor, and everyone's like, oh my god, this guy's a badass. He comes to this realization that if this is a shark cage, or if this is a shark cage and Alioth is a shark, then he must be alive and they must be able to kill Alioth. And that's what Loki's do, is they survive. So that was the plan Loki had. He asked for anybody to come along with him, and they all basically laugh in his face. So Loki, determined to fight back against this, leaves this underground bunker, and as he opens the bunker door, he is immediately met with, you guessed it, we haven't seen him, we saw him in the trailer, it's President Loki. Surrounded by, we now know, other Loki variants who I think in the trailer may have been edited to look a little less Loki than they looked in the actual shots. One in particular, his Loki crown was just a bike handle, like, tied to his head, which is interesting. But they were all Loki variants, and the Loki variants that we've gotten to know, classic Loki, boastful Loki, Kid Loki, Croc Loki, them, they are taking capture by these pirate Lokis, quote unquote. We see an example of what Marvel so desperately loves to do, which is take these small moments in series and in movies and put them in the trailer to make us all think we know what's going on when we don't. Another example of this was the scene where we find out that Loki was that famous man who stole the airplane. You remember his? We found out that Loki was DB Cooper. We thought that would be a much bigger thing. We thought Loki would be traveling through time and then would become DB Cooper, but no, he always was DB Cooper, and it was just kind of a throwaway thing. We kind of see the same thing here. President Loki was another kind of throwaway, throw you off the trail thing, because he's really only in it for maybe 5 minutes tops before his hand gets bit off by Croc Loki, and we find out that all the Lokis were betraying each other because Loki can't even trust himself. But in this madness, we see our Loki, the Loki that we've been following thus far, not really bothered, nor scared, nor threatened by any of the other Lokis. Just, he looks tired. He looks so tired of dealing with it that he basically just walks out with the assistance of classic Loki and Kid Loki, because we found out that boastful Loki was the one who sold everybody out as a chance to become king and to claim the throne over the Lokis. Now, we also find out something interesting about classic Loki, which is that his Nexus event was basically he left and he went off to a planet and he sat there for thousands and thousands of years, and he grew old, and that's why he was able to outlive his grand purpose, which was supposed to be to die, to be killed by Thanos. But in doing so, he's had time to meditate and think on himself, and he realizes the ridiculousness of having a grand purpose that Loki talks about in the first episode of Loki, having this destiny to rule, having to have power over people, having to trick people. Those aren't things that classic Loki is interested in anymore. So from that point, we see Loki, Kid Loki, Croc Loki, and Classic Loki as they go run off into the nothingness of the void, leaving the rest of the Lokis basically to kill themselves. Because that's what a Loki does, is he betrays everyone. What are your thoughts on
Well,
all of this?
as far as we're concerned, that's how Loki traditionally is. But what we're finding out here now, specifically with the classic Loki and our Loki, is they aren't that cookie cutter. They aren't just these, conventional, like typical Lokis that the show and the people that understand Loki ascribe them to be, which are these backstabbing, mischievous scamps, right? Like both classic Loki has his moment, which we'll get into as we wrap this up, and Loki, our Loki, is totally coming around. Like he has that he sincerely feels for Sylvie, more so than we've really ever seen him feel about genuinely anyone as far
Yeah.
as MCU canon. And we see once, Sylvie and Mobius and the Loki squad meet up, Sylvie had the Tempad, so that was literally the only way you could exit the void, presumably, right? So Mobius goes ahead and pisses right off to the TVA, but not before Loki gives him a hug, and a sincere one at that. And he said, "Thank you, friend." Like, that is a huge character moment for Loki. And I think that it's showing that you don't have to be the person that people think you are. There's
Yeah.
always time to change. There's always time for character to grow and for you to evolve as a person and better yourself. And this entire show, when we step back and look at it, we're going to be able to plot the hero's journey character arc of the transition
Absolutely.
from where we find Loki at the beginning to who he is at the end of this. And it'll be super curious, which we can get into when with our final speculation as we look to the finale, is what this is going to mean for Loki by the end of this as far as the greater MCU is concerned. But since we're running up against the clock, we should get to our final point, which is talking about the defeating of Alioth, as well as the portal mechanic that seems to occur within Alioth that leads to a very interesting sort of gothic dungeon castle looking thing, which there's a number of theories I want to posit to you, two specifically, that we can kind of get into as to what this could possibly be.
Yeah.
But what did you think? What did you think of this whole sequence?
I think this is probably the most important scene in this show. I think this is the turning point that we've been looking for Loki to have. And I want to harper back to the first episode where Mobius is putting pressure on Loki in that interrogation room. And he says, Lokis only exist to push other people to be their best. And I think that is pretty much the outline for the rest of this series, because the only person Loki's now interacting with is himself. So if that's all Lokis are for, when Loki meets up with another Loki, they're forced to push each other to be their best selves, which we see not only in Loki and Sylvie, but we're also seeing in classic Loki, who, I remind you, the reason that his Nexus event happened was because he decided to come back, and when asked why he went back to, or he wanted to go back to Asgard, he said he missed his brother, showing again that Lokis are capable of this compassion that maybe we haven't seen as often as we would like within the MCU. But to get back to the point that we're talking on, this moment shows, first off, what a Loki is capable of once a Loki gets over, for lack of a better word, gets over themselves, gets over their ego. They're able to create these grand magical feats once they understand themselves, believe in themselves, and kind of love themselves, which is a difficult thing to ask for anybody day to day, especially a god of mischief who was basically raised under false pretenses like Loki was. But we see that in understanding and loving themselves, they're able to get this grand power to raise Asgard in this place. And not only that, but are able to learn new magic. Loki learns enchanting in that moment. And through the help of Sylvie and Loki working together, they're able to enchant Eliath, which is this grand like time
Mm-hmm.
being that spans not only across like a single timeline, but all timelines and throughout time. Um, this is a huge feat if you know about Eliath, though it may just watching it off the cuff seem like just this giant beast. He's not just a giant beast, he's a giant beast who exists almost in the fourth dimension. So this is incredible. And in doing so, of course, they quote unquote defeat the guard dog guarding the creator of the TVA. And we see as Eliath opens up, he unveils the specific spot in time at the end of the universe that he was guarding, where we are to assume the creator of the TVA is. But we'll get into final thoughts and speculations on who we think that might be. But I'm going to let you go ahead and go first with your final thoughts and speculations on who might be in that gothic castle that we see.
Yes. I overall I really enjoyed this episode. Probably not my favorite. I think last week's episode was probably one of my more favorites. I think it was better than this one. But I'm foaming at the mouth to see the finale. I think that I enjoyed WandaVision a great deal, and I really enjoyed Falcon and the Winter Soldier a great deal as well. But I think both of those shows, COVID pandemic stuff aside, because it kind of messed with their schedule in a lot of ways. Aside from those how that interfered with production, I think both of those finales kind of ended in a bit of a whimper for me, or just kind of it was all right. I really am hoping that they can stick the landing with this, because I think that this show has all the way through been incredibly like flawless in a lot of ways. I really have a hard time coming up with any sort of dings or anything I didn't particularly like for it. So in general, I've had a blast watching this. I will rewatch it again, and I am nervous but very, very excited for the finale next week, as well as I'm sure we're going to get at least one or two post-credit scenes, as is customary. And I'm excited to see how this starts to embed itself in the future Marvel television shows as well as the movies. Now, as far as my final speculations, couple things. One, I think that there's going to be sort of an A-B plot sort of takedown thing that's going to happen in this next episode. I think that Mobius and Hunter C-15 are going to work within the TVA against Renslayer, Ravonna, to basically take down the TVA. I think they're going to wake up a lot of variants, a lot of the TVA workers, and be like, hey, let's rise up and like let's dethrone let's unshackle ourselves from this mind prison that we've kind of been stuck in for most of our lives. I think that's going to be a thing that happens. And then I think the other thing that's going to happen is we're going to follow Sylvie and Loki as they cross into that portal, and we find out who or what is controlling all of this, who has been the master puppeteer behind this. Again, the further we've gone on in this show, it does seem to be Kang. He is going to show up in the 2023 Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. That's still about another year and a half to 2 years away. So I don't know if they would like legitimately show us Kang at all. It may also not even be Kang. But the two little theories that I've been finding out on the internet right now as we've been recording about what this is there's two possibilities that people seem to be circling the drain on as far as theories are concerned. One being that this is Chronopolis, which is Kang's basically like domain. It's his it's his home, it's his castle, so to speak. This comes from comicbook.com. The inclusion of Eliath, as we've already alluded to earlier in this episode, only adds to the theory that this is Chronopolis, because in the comics, that creature, Eliath, is tasked with protecting the entry to Chronopolis. So maybe, that could potentially be it. Lastly, I am very just overtly curious as to when this ends. Are we still going to see Loki in future films or future TV shows, or will this kind of put a period at the end of this character's story and Tom Hiddleston as Loki, and he kind of just rides off into the sunset? I have no idea.
my final thoughts on this episode, from a person who just loves a story that is rich with character detail and character development, I am loving every inch of this show. Everything that it's been through, everything that it's challenged Loki with, that it's challenged Sylvie with. All the characters have been just challenged to become different, better, and learn. Those lessons are lessons that we've learned along the way, and I really credit the writers to that as well. That was, of course, in no short supply in this episode. We saw a lot of really challenging moments for Loki, but because of that, I feel like he learned how special it is that he has gained this trust in Sylvie. And I would love to see that develop as we go on. I think that you're right on with saying that it's going to be an A-B plot going in the finale of Mobius and Agent B-15 working together to take down the TVA from the inside, while Loki and Sylvie try to take it down from the outside. I do think that by the end of the episode, we're going to see all of it come together into one giant fight. And if I had to point my bat out to the outfield and claim a home run, I would say what's going to end up happening is we're going to see Loki and Sylvie, in my opinion, chase Kang into the TVA, where he and Ravonna are going to make an escape, forcing everybody back to their original timelines, maybe clearing everyone's memory of the TVA, and we're going to be left with Sylvie, Loki, and Mobius in the end, and Mobius is going to give them the satisfaction of escaping together, hopefully into our main MCU timeline, where he will take on the place of the Loki that was killed off during Infinity War and Endgame. I think that's the direction that we're going to see this going, is our Loki from now being put into our universe again, maybe to stand beside Thor. I think it'll be interesting. I think it'll be an important part of maybe Thor Love and Thunder, as we see Thor and Lady Thor, who is Jane Foster, being introduced back to Loki and now Lady Loki, possibly. We'll see that team up, which will be very interesting. Maybe that's what they're teaming up. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But all in all, I think we're heading in a really great direction for Marvel. We don't see them slowing down anytime soon, which was, of course, a fear, seeing Phase 1 coming to an end. But they're really picking up the ball with this new storyline they're going with.
Yeah, this is an exciting time to live. I hope I don't die, because we've got a lot more Marvel shit to watch. So
That's right.
Looking forward to the finale of Loki next week.
Agreed. So we will see you guys next week for that finale, our final episode of Yumi and Loki, and to see if any of our theories span out. So until then, keep theorizing. This has been Yumi and Loki on the Entertain This YouTube channel, and we'll see you guys again next Wednesday. See ya.
Farewell.